So now let's talk about the harmonizing, not the normalizing, the harmonizing, the final
harmonizing.
one.
Right. And so harmonizing subtypes are the more empathic and reflective subtype. And for ISFPs, this might be, actually, in some ways, the creative ISFP is a bit of a stereotype, but I think harmonizing is also a bit of a stereotype for ISFPs, because this is the more chill vibe version. This is the one that comes across as more mystical. So these, some of the characteristics and traits of these ISFPs is caring, mystical, peaceful. They can be the most spiritual of all the types, not just of the ISFP subtypes, but like all the types. This can be one of the most spiritually inclined of the types. And they tend to work in the background, as opposed to the dominant that wants to be at the forefront, the creative that wants to be in the light, or the normalizing that wants to be in the middle of the group. This is more of a behind the scenes ISFP.
Yeah.
And they tend to make really good counselors, teachers, healers, and creators. Not creative creators, but more like sort of manifesting the things that they want into the world. Have very high emotional intelligence. That's one of the markers. They might find themselves in artistic roles, but they also might find themselves in meditative roles or even therapeutic roles. This is a giving of the world the gifts that they have received by observation, right?
Yeah.
That they're receiving a lot of information and considering the implication of it. And so where they really shine is when they can share what they have observed.
I've seen ISFPs that are harmonizing struggle with thinking sometimes they're INFJs. As an example, they're so tapped into the intuition, into picking up psychic energy from other people, the therapeutic nature of tapped into what's going on for other humans. They almost have this sense, and sometimes they struggle, like, am I an INFJ or am I an ISFP? And they can go back and forth because of this particular expression of ISFP. Like you said, it's much more, I think there's like a shamanistic or spiritual or esoteric nature to them. And so I think a lot of the career choices are going to lend themselves that way.
Yeah, very much so. This is an ISFP that identifies with INFJ preferences because they're more, there's a deeply intuitive feeling inside of them. It's really actually playing off of the visceral sensory information they're getting, and some of the connections they're making from that. Like they can see and spot abstract patterns, particularly when they are personally there, when they're feeling and seeing what's happening in a situation. And that feels a lot like intuition, that a capacity to sort of read what's happening for another person. And they are more open-ended, right? There's less of a definitive feeling from them. It's less of an assertive, like, this is how things have to be. There's more of an openness that I think we don't always assign to ISFPs. We see them as being more convicted.
Yeah.
And this ISFP is a little bit more like, let's kind of see the situation and feel our way through it.
I'm glad you said conviction, because I would like to just take a moment. Which of these subtypes, I suspect the dominant subtype and the normalizing subtype are going to be the most convicted of all these subtypes, because I think conviction is a through line as well as self-expression. I think, at least my personal experience with ISFPs in my life, conviction is a huge piece of their life for all of them.
Yeah.
And I would say those two types, would you agree to that those two types are the most likely to come across with that conviction frame?
Yeah.
This is how it has to be.
I think all introverted feeling types, so FPs, if you're new, we're talking about people who have FP preferences. They all use introverted feeling or authenticity as their decision-making function. And all people who have this function as a strength are very aware of how they feel about things, like what they like and dislike, what they think is right or wrong. There's going to always be a natural tapping into that energy. Yeah. But when it has an analytic preference, which is that sort of assertive, focused preference, that's when there's a tendency to be on a crusade, right? There's there's a definitiveness to it. There's an assertiveness of what has already been concluded and figured out. When introverted feeling or authenticity has a more holistic flavor to it, it's still in touch with what it likes and dislikes and the things that mean something, but it tends to be more reflective about the self. It's more exploring how things are making it feel as opposed to, getting to a place of quick conclusion making around it. And so if people who have the analytic version are on a crusade, people who have the holistic version they have like a lot of little crusades, like a little things that mean something to them. And so you might only run into that thing when it's been triggered. Like you might not know that this is really important to this person until the situation triggers it.
Yeah.
As opposed to somebody with the analytic version, which is going to be like they're leading with it. They're letting you know before they even get there what's important to them. So the dominant and the normalizing, which taps into that more assertive analytic version, that their positions are going to be a little bit more obvious.
Yeah. So as we move back again to the harmonizing subtype, out of the 4 expressions of ISFP, they're probably the most open and less convicted. I mean, they still have access to that conviction like you talked about, but they probably aren't leading with that all the time. They're probably not going through life on a cause or a mission. They're more open and letting the energy come to them. Mm-hmm. And so careers that they choose or the type of work that they end up doing or the vocation they go into is probably going to lend itself to more of that openness, mm-hmm. less of a crusade I'm on and more of a support or gathering energy, letting it come into me, letting the energy come to me onto my turf.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, this is going to be more of a counselor, a healer. We talked about with ESFPs that are harmonizing, they can even be shamans. The same deal with ISFPs that are more harmonizing. They might even have a shamanistic streak. Or it might not necessarily have to be, specifically spiritual. It can simply be therapeutic. So I think you're going to see them in a lot of different roles where they're helping guide another person or other people to finding that person, helping find their best self or something that really allows a person to work through a healing time period in their life. They're like guiding. They're almost like guides. And there's a peaceful strength to these ISFPs that makes them particularly suited for that kind of work. The challenge, and then there's another component, which is that because they're so tapped into all of this and they've got that sort of intuition that comes from the visceral piece, their connection isn't just to humans, it's also to nature, it's to animals, it's to a world that's a little bigger than just the interaction of sort of the systems that humans have set up. So there might be a naturalistic streak here too. And that might make them very attracted to taking care of animals, maybe something like a vet or a person who works, maybe in a zoo or something where they can be close to animals and then also to nature. Maybe they're a guide, right? Like a nature guide or somebody who works like horticulture, works closely with nature.
That makes a lot of sense.